Good evening, and welcome to Politics and Prose. My name is Shayla Washington, and I'm a bookseller here at the Connecticut Avenue store. As you may know, we host almost 1,000 events each year at our locations here, the Wharf and Union Market, as well as other various locations throughout DC. Please grab a calendar of events at our information desk if you haven't already. You can also go to our website to find a calendar showing everything confirmed for the next 3 months. We have a few notes before we jump into tonight's talk. First of all, we ask that you please silence your cell phones and any other noise-making devices. And we also ask that if you have something you'd like to ask during the question and answer portion of tonight's program, that you stand up and address your question into the microphones we have set up so that everyone can hear you. We have a microphone stand by the water cooler to my right and by the pillar to my left right there. We're also recording tonight's event, so it's important that we can hear your question. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome John Sayles to Politics and Prose for the release of his new book, Yellow Earth. A writer, actor, and filmmaker, Sayles has directed 18 feature films, and his screenplays have been nominated for Academy Awards, Golden Globes, and a BAFTA. His novel, Union Dues, was also nominated for a National Book Award. Yellow Earth revives the spirit of the Wild West to trace the arc of a classic boom and bust cycle, exploring a clash of worldviews when shale oil is discovered on the site of the Three Nations Reservation in North Dakota. As the drilling and fracking get underway, the reservation, rebranded the Three Nations Petroleum Company, is beset by a horde of get-rich-quick opportunists who stick around until a global dip in oil prices ends the fun. So please welcome John Sayles. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, that was the copy that I didn't approve. So it's sort of about something like that. It is based on the kind of shale oil boom and bust that happened up in the Bakken Range, which is mostly in North Dakota. Some of it spills over into neighboring states and into Canada. I've named the town that it's based on, the small city it's based on, Yellow Earth in the book. And it was a small city starting to lose especially its younger population, that went from 15,000 people, and then when the oil company decided to bring the shale oil and gas up, in 6 months it had 45,000 people. Most of those new 30,000 people being men without women and their camp followers. And so it's kind of a classic feeding frenzy. I started thinking about it probably 30 years ago or more when there was a similar shale oil find in Wyoming around Green River. And at that time, the technology of fracking and getting oil out of shale was not what it is today. And so it was a very short boom and bust. They realized pretty quickly that they were losing money doing it. And in really about a year and a half, they made just an enormous mess and then left. My last book, Moment in the Sun, starts at the in about, I think it was 1897 in the Yukon gold rush, which was a similar situation, except there wasn't a city already. It was just a lot of frozen ground. And then pretty much overnight, within a week, there were like 5,000 people, and then 10,000 people, and then 15,000 people living in tents. So I've been kind of fascinated by these invasions of communities and what happens to the people who are already there, and who are the people who come, and who are the camp followers, and what's the life of a place like that. So I'm going to read you a couple little sections. This first one is set on an oil rig, so a discouraging word will be heard. That's pretty much the way people speak there. And one of the main characters who recurs a couple times is a guy named Tuck Gatlin, who's kind of been a failure. He's in his mid to late 30s. His wife is a history teacher at the local high school, and he's had little businesses that had failed, and he was kind of a dreamer who's never really caught on to something that he's been successful at. And when all this money comes in, he somehow wangles a job working on an oil rig, which he's never done before. And like the rest of the book, the point of view shifts very often in the rest of the book. There's a lot of chapters that are from a different person's point of view. And even in this little 15-page section, the point of view shifts a couple times. 9,000 feet down, making hole a joint at a time, and hoping the weather holds out. Warm enough still that only Hurry Upshaw, the driller, and the latest worm, Tuck or Buck or Schmuck, take your pick, are wearing heavy stuff under their rig togs. They're not into the lower layer of shale yet, so it's quick drilling, not much more than 20 minutes till the Kelly drive is nearly to the deck, and it's time to add to the string. Hurry shutting the mud pumps down and winching the drive up as Ike squeegees sludge off the outside of the pipe with a rolled towel till the Kelly Saver sub is clear. Mike steering the breakout tong over to clamp on and kicking in the heavy slips to hold the string steady in the hole, and Hurry spins the rotary table to break the connection before lifting the Kelly clear for Ike to walk it over to the joint, waiting in the mouse hole. Mike quickly swabbing dope on pipe threads before Ike clamps the makeup tong on the mouse hole pipe, and Mike sets the chain, wrapping it just below the box of the joint. Ike guides and Hurry stabs the Kelly Saver sub pin into the box, lets the weight press down as Mike throws the chain, whipping around the sub to be immediately pulled taut, and the connection torqued solid with cat line and tongs. Mike and Ike back away with their tools as Hurry hoists the Kelly assembly and new joint up into the derrick till the bottom end hangs clear, Ike waltzing it over to the standing pipe, and the connection dance is repeated. Thread dope, tongs and chain, the satisfying scrunch of married steel, and then Hurry sends the string down again till the Kelly bushing is jimmied solid into the rotary table and the bit meets strata and the mud pumps thrum back to life. Drilling ahead. Tulsa, the motorman, is helping with cleanup and hoisting of the next joint from the V-door down into the mouse hole, which somebody more competent than the local hire, Pluck or Fuck, would be doing, instead of off dumping 100-pound sacks of bentonite into the mud flow. Fella's got emergency room written all over him, says Diz on the guy's first tour, and Hightower, the tool pusher, has told them to take it easy on him until he knows his asshole from the annulus, which might be never. The pretenders before him all left the field with concussions or mashed fingers or that rash that looked like raw hamburger, as if anybody could be fucking allergic to oil base. But they are making whole, and Hurry hasn't screamed at anybody all morning, and it's neither cooking them on the metal deck or freezing them with that Canadian Dick Shriller wind they know is coming. The hole is a gassy son of a bitch, of course. One nasty kick while going through the top shale layer that had Hightower on site for half a day reading gauges, and Gleason throwing kill mud down the hole. But that's always a sign that the well is likely to pay off. You draw your check the same whether it does or not, but nobody likes humping pipe into a disappointment. Drilling, even in this soft stuff that cuts so quick, is a pretty relaxed rhythm. Entire minutes where there's nothing weighing a couple tons swinging around trying to decapitate you. Time to scratch your nuts or fart or ignore the no smoking signs plastered everywhere. Dizzy has the new worm tending what little is needed with the mud pits, and Hurry won't invent jobs that don't need doing, like some drillers you could name, while Tulsa keeps all the machinery roaring and screeching. Good rig so far for one of the better companies. Some of the shit they've seen thrown up on this patch looks like a set for an OSHA disaster tutorial. Tuck climbs onto the platform, safety mask pulled down around his neck, blinking and coughing. Didn't I tell you not to dump it into the hopper all at once, says Tulsa. A lot of dust, which you just huffed into your lungs. You take a shit tonight, it's going to come out like a hunk of lead. What do I do next? Tulsa sighs. This is the fourth roustabout hopeful this month. You remember where you put that shovel? I do, says Tuck. He's not a kid with good focus, a willingness to work, but no oil-filled skills whatsoever. You remember which end of it you hold on to? Tuck just waits. Follow me, we got some trenches need digging over by the tanks. Mike and Ike are veteran floor hands, pushing 25, not related, though constantly taken for brothers. They hire out as a team, were both wide receivers for their high school teams, which met in the State 5 Class 5A quarterfinals in McAllister. Both drive rammed-up GTOs and rarely utter a sentence unrelated to pussy or its many permutations. I think we're getting close here, says Mike, eyeing the few joints of drill pipe left on the rack. This bitch about to pop. About goddamn time, Ike agrees. We've been giving her the shaft most of a week now. They are blonde, still thin and rangy, dancing around each other and swinging the huge orange tongs in place, with never a bump or a stumble. Chain flying within inches of Ike's head when Mike throws it singing around the pipe. Imperturbable, even wet tripping in a windstorm. Not that I'm complaining, says Mike, centering the end of the next joint over the mouse hole, but a man gets tired of screwing the damn same patch of ground. Tuck tries to remember to bend his knees as he digs. He dragged the new-bought coveralls around the yard a couple times and had Francine wash them without soap the night before he started, but still looked like a model from a Carhartt catalog when he reported for work. 3 days on the job, though, and they looked just like the other hands' gear, dirt and oil ground into the fibers, hanging wet against his skin. The driller hasn't led him any further than the edge of the platform yet, so what he's learned about what goes on there is off shaky YouTube videos, but he's starting to get a handle on circulation. He had no idea of the amount of energy involved with forcing fluid in and out of the hole, water thickened with clay and chemicals and who knows what, to cool the drill bit and push the cuttings up the outside of the drill pipe and do more mysterious things while it's down there. A specialist named Gleason consulting data in the doghouse and sampling what flows out from the shaft to determine just what and how much of it to add. A range from weak tea to brownie mix pumped in from the tanks, and something similar flushed out into the mud pits to sit till the cuttings have dropped out. The liquid waiting to be refortified and recycled through the system. New water comes in regularly on tanker trucks, and Tuck is clueless as to where it all comes from or where it goes to live when it's too fucked up to reuse anymore. Somebody else's problem. Tuck's problem is getting through the tour without wrenching any part of his body so bad he can't show up the next morning. He's tried going to bed extra early, lying there trying to discover a joint that didn't ache, but even with decent sleep, 7 to 7 is a long day, the sheer relentless noise of the whole operation like an assault on his soul. Tuck stabs and lifts, not sure what the ditch he's digging from here to there is supposed to drain, and it's clear that any question he asks at this point will be considered a dumb one. Pay attention, do what you're told, and stay the fuck out of the way, was the extent of his orientation from Hightower, and he is doing his best to follow that advice. Hell, if he was dropped into Francine's classroom and told to explain North Dakota history, he'd be just as lost. Every job takes some breaking in. But these oil patch characters are like a cult, got their own language, their own sense of humor, know what to do before it needs doing. The pay, if he can stick for a month and be taken on as a full-time hand, is through the roof, and he's never seen guys hungrier for extra hours. Food sucks, nothing to fuck, nothing to do, one of the twin deckhands, Ike or Mike, immune to the charms of Yellow Earth, told him. If you ain't asleep, you might as well be getting paid. Upshaw flushes the hole and shuts the pump off at something over 10,000 feet and confers with Hightower in the doghouse, the bit cooling to wait their decision. Time for lunch. Mike and Ike, Tulsa, Dizzy, and the new guy sit on a stack of planking by the premix tank, eating what they've brought. The Okies both have steak and cheese sandwiches prepped at the man camp where they're staying, and decide to fill the worm in on the big picture, passing the baton so quickly that Tuck loses track, if he ever really had it, of which is Ike and which is Mike. Your average tool pusher got a lot of decisions to make. Well, there's finesse involved in the process because out here, stimulation happens after drilling. So you got to start with your entrance hole diameter, which best be able to accommodate the gauge of your tubular. And then you'd better evaluate the downhole environment, particularly important if it's going to be a deflocculation. And keep an open mind while you're still just spudding in, because the deeper you go, the tighter it gets. So you just keep screwing away at that borehole, controlling your rate of penetration, unless you're off dumping into a golden throat hopper, which is a whole nother job description. Always sure to have your BOP, that's a blowout preventer, linked into the process. Don't want to spritz off before it's time. Well site fluid slopping all over the place. And then when you're coming out of the hole, you're going to see whether this deal is going to proceed to pump or it's just another P&A. That's plugged and abandoned. Any questions? Tuck waits an appropriate beat, deadpan, then asks the difference between a mouse hole and a rat hole, and they begin to hope he makes it through the week without permanent body injury. Hurry Upshaw comes out from the doghouse to holler that they'll stop drilling at this depth and send the diagnostics down, so the whole string has to come up. Here's where we find out, says Ike or Mike to the new guy, whether we're going to fuck this bitch sideways or not. Tripping out. Pipe is flying out of the hole. Ike and Mike twisting off 3-joint stands that Dizzy, safety strapped up in the crow's nest 80 feet from the rig floor, plucks from the elevator suspended from the top drive and tucks into the monkey board fingers. The new man guiding the bottom end, 12,000 pounds of steel tightly racked into the stand as the string comes up, up, up. Diz leaning out from his belly buster cable, jerking his head in rhythm to anthrax blasting from his boombox hung from a derrick strut, and loving it. Top of the world, a real-life Spider-Man pulling down 35 smackers an hour. Hurry is an artist with the draw works, and you can't hear him curse or yell up here, even without the music going. Mike and Ike are double-teaming the connections, and from the top, you can see Tulsa over fixing a shale shaker and the north-south highway and 2 sorry-ass farmhouses and at least 8 other rigs in various stages of scattered around the horizon. The Bakken is rockin'. The sky above and the mud below, thinks Dizzy. Rack 'em up and keep the fluids comin'. Hurry Upshaw makes more money and gets to push the buttons and yank the levers, but drillers have to stick with the hole pretty much 24/7 and answer to the tool pusher and the company and deal with flakes like himself who get off on the circus act part of the job. Dizzy has only ridden the Geronimo cable down once during a mandatory safety drill, but it was so much fun he's tempted to quit the derrick that way all the time. They hit a couple dog legs coming up, something shifted inside the hole that snags a joint, but nothing that doesn't hoist free. There is a kind of music to the procedure, a rhythm, and it's always a little bit sad to have to return to earth. The top of the stack is only swaying a little bit in the wind today, no clouds in sight, and he can't think of a place he'd rather be. Downtime is tough, though. Nothing but scruffy deckhands with deep voices shuffling around you in the cafeterias and public rooms of the man camps. The awkward calls to home. The generic high plains nothing of a town if you do bother to drive in. Girls waving their titties at 'em just make 'em lonelier, and you don't want to strap into that derrick climber still wrecked from the night before. But tripping out in decent weather is as good as it gets. The stands stack up one by one, and the sun dips, getting dark earlier now, just a few fingers above the horizon when the cable outfit arrives and starts unloading their gear. Tuck is running on fumes by the time the bottom hole assembly finally comes up. Mike and Ike pulling the drill bit and collar off the bottom of the last stand, barely space left for it on the rack. He teeters on his feet, not comprehending at first as Mike and Ike pass him to leave the platform, as Dizzy starts his descent from the crow nest, that this tour is over. He's survived again. Other men clang up the metal stairs as he wanders toward them, and he feels a sudden pang of jealousy. "Welcome, gentlemen," shouts Hurry Upshaw to the arriving crew. "Do not fuck up my hole." And then I'm going to read you another little section. Thank you. this particular shale oil find spread from the towns, but also onto the nearby Indian reservation. And they had a complicated situation where it was a reservation, like many, where the land was not owned totally by the tribe or enrolled members of the tribe, but kind of a checkerboard with a lot of outsiders and white people and even people from different tribes also owning patches of land there. And the chairman of their tribal council decided that this was going to be their way finally to get the federal government off their back. His catch slogan was sovereignty by the barrel. And so he opened his arms to the oil business. Unfortunately, in his own oil services company, where he made some side money, he had a white guy partner who happened to be a con man and eventually murderer. So things did not turn out well there. This is a little section set on the reservation, and one of the main characters in the book is a guy named Danny Two Strike, who is the chief of tribal police. And there's a complicated situation on a lot of the reservations in the U.S. where the tribes will have their own tribal police, but they can only officially arrest people for Indian on Indian crime. And so if a non-Indian comes onto the reservation and commits a crime against a white person or a native person, they have to, and these are very big reservations in the West, call on one of the many county sheriffs surrounding the reservation and hope that that person has the time and inclination to come in and deal with this white on Indian crime or whatever it is. So part of what happens in these invasions is that a lot of people make a lot more money. In the case of Yellow Earth, people who were working at Walmart or McDonald's all of a sudden could demand double their pay because they could easily go and mop the floor at a man camp for an oil company and make much more than they were making doing that kind of entry-level job. Some people, though, are on fixed income, and those include teachers and law enforcement people who not only are getting paid the same as the price of bread and lodging and everything is going up in their town, but they're not getting any more help. So they don't have the money to hire another deputy or put on extra teachers or whatever that. So Danny is a guy who's pretty stressed out during the whole book. There is only a tiny bit of a rabbit peeking out from underneath the stickers. Along with various political candidates and their running mates are the simple classics: Red Power, Proud to be Hidatsa, Appealing Free Leonard Peltier, the new agey The Earth Does Not Belong to Us, We Belong to the Earth, and a nice one he hasn't noticed before: My Heroes Have Always Killed Cowboys. Marjorie Looks for Water is leaning against her old VW, that expectant smile on her face and her eyes huge behind the thick lenses, parked just behind his patrol car when Danny steps out. She nods back toward the Fetterjohn's trailer. Any clues on who stole the Arctic cat? Marjorie has jiggered some contraption that she keeps in the Rabbit, able to monitor the department's radio calls. Not until the first snowfall. Probably kids. What idiot steals a snowmobile in July? He looks at her car. What isn't stickered is pitted with rust. You're back on the road? It's been 3 months. I thought it was 6. That's for full reinstatement. I've got restricted status back, no highway or night driving. Already set my appointment at the clinic. You understand the responsibility? If it was only your own safety at stake. She has tonic-clonic seizures with no warning signs and is almost bitten through her tongue twice. I plan my routes, she smiles. I take my meds. What have they got you on? Carbatrol. Don't the side effects include fatigue? Marjorie's smile widens. Do I look fatigued to you? From all evidence, Marjorie doesn't sleep. When he pulls a graveyard shift, there is always a light on at her little house, and he stopped in for coffee and conspiracy theories more than once. The thing is, Chief, I've been noticing how thin you've been spread with all these new people coming in. and I thought you might want to reconsider. She is one of the few that call him chief, though that is his department title. You mean as a patrolman, patrol person? I passed the test 3 times. You passed the written test 3 times and flunked pretty much every part of the physical. When the Sioux attacked us, she says, up there with Teresa Crow's ghost for historical trivia, did the people ask if you had 20/20 vision? What's yours, 2100? With corrective lenses, and do I remember something about limited peripheral acuity? When she ran Indian County tours, Marjorie had led people into the wrong chamber of a cave looking for pictographs, then had her flashlight batteries die. Chief, I hear things that other people don't. That's called an auditory delusion, Marjorie. I wouldn't brag about it. But you need help. Your support and encouragement is an inspiration to the entire department. Marjorie is addicted to America's Most Wanted and cops. She is a constant blogger on websleuths.com and chat partner of the people still wondering who killed the Black Dahlia. And if she could see past her nose and didn't fall down in eye-rolling, bone-racking convulsions at inconvenient moments, Danny would love to have her on the force. So how's your news business going? Schrecklich, and that's terrific. She runs an online catalog shipping native handicrafts off to German people who are gaga about Indians. And your mother? Hanging in there. Marjorie lives with her mother, who carries a cell phone with the ambulance service on speed dial in case Marjorie's epilepsy strikes at home. So far, she's only used it to report sightings of her son, gone missing in Vietnam 40 years ago, on television. Good, that's good. And really, I'm sorry there's nothing to be done about the job. Just thought I'd try. You're taking it really well. Marjorie has been known to persist, to plant herself in his office or block his path back to the patrol car. That's the car patrol. For me, it might as well be Prozac. So your moods? I don't have moods anymore, Chief. I am the eagle that never comes to earth, floating above it all, observing through your corrective lenses. I see things, she says, see things on the reservation. Marjorie is not a snitch exactly, but she does get around, does listen to the gossip, and has a forensic slant on life. Such as, oh, Dickie Boy Burdette isn't missing, whatever his grandmother might have told you. He just doesn't come home very often. You've seen him? All the time. He goes to school. You can't be missing if you attend class. Mystery solved, I'll tell his grandmother. She'll just forget. And then I see things left on the land, piles of them, puddles of them, in places where they shouldn't be. The drilling stuff is not my beat. Take that up with Ricky McAllen. He's APA for the chairman. The chairman's got his hands full. Business problems, family problems. Then he opens the door of the patrol car to hear the radio. But it's only Patty at the mic singing. She leaves the Vox switched on sometimes. Terrific voice, says Marjorie. She's in my church choir. Danny sits into the patrol car. Marjorie is lonely and always ready to lay a recent unsolved murder on you, but tells such a good story you get caught up in it and time goes by. I really do hear things, Chief. Another offering. Benny picks this one up. What did you hear? Noises, loud voices, banging, slaps, and weeping from the Carter place. J.C. Carter is a white guy, real piece of work, married to one of the Dozier girls who came up from Standing Rock. Put her in the hospital in Bismarck once. They're at least 2 miles down the road from you. Very loud noises. Somebody might need a talking to before he commits a capital crime. She is looking at him intensely, Marjorie, those magnified eyes signaling that this is dead serious. He drinking again? Amphetamines. That he gets from who? She might tell him if she knew, even if it was a relative, which, considering some of Marjorie's relatives, is entirely possible. She shrugs. Whole lot more of that floating around the res these days, as you know. Danny nods, shuts the door, but rolls the window down. I'll get over there and see what I can do, he says. Thanks, Marjorie. He drives toward the lake. J.C. Carter spends a lot of time lifting cold ones at Lonnie's out in the county, but he might be home. And if not, his ride is easy to spot. a jet black Ram pickup with rocket flame detailing on the sides, and the single bumper sticker, red letters over a silhouette of an automatic pistol. Just keep honking, it says. I'm reloading. Thanks. If anybody has any questions about anything, doesn't have to be one of my books or one of my movies, just I'll make up. Yeah. Yeah, right there.
So, anyone questions, please form a line here in the audience.
It's okay.
Oh, excuse me.
Is it working? Yeah. First of all, when are we going to see City of Hope released on DVD? It's overdue. No, I'm only kidding. You don't have to. You don't have to respond to that. It was just a joke. Here's my actual question. How would you consider your novel in its in the context of its timeliness to our current state of affairs?
Yeah, it took about a year for me to get a publisher for this, and then it took them about 6 months to actually get it out. So you can't count on timeliness too much with books. You really just have to talk about stuff that you're interested in, that you feel like, will be timely 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I think I had a book that came out, I think it was in 1990, Los Gusanos, that was about our long kind of strange dance with Cuba and, Cuban-American relations. And I remember at the time thinking, damn, that Fidel Castro's going to die and nobody's going to want to read my book. He hung on longer than the novel did. We still have to figure out this thing of, we still need oil and gas to run things. We're not all on, alternative energy these days. But what does it cost? The bust of this boom and bust happened basically because the boom was when gas was $4 a gallon at the pump, and fracking, which is a little more expensive than traditional drilling, made sense, economic sense for the oil companies. It especially made sense for them if they were able to do what they're with the Halliburton Amendment loophole that Mr. Cheney helped push through. Even when we had an EPA that was allowed to do what their charter says, they weren't allowed to have any control over oil exploration or extraction. So companies were able to, big oil companies tended to subcontract everything. So by the time you got down to the company that was supposed to do the remediation, which means in the case of fracking, there's a lot of radioactive water that comes up and it has to go somewhere. And there's things that are now radioactive that, filters and things like that. And where are they going to be left and how disposed of? Those companies would do a third to a half of the remediation that they were supposed to, and then go out of business, which the big companies pretty much knew they were going to do. But hey, that's not our company. So that's still something we've got to figure out is yes, there's a lot of profit in this, but would people actually frack if they had to pay for the mess that they make?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
As a member of the current generation, I'll try to find the answer to your question.
Good. Work on that.
Yeah. I'm not really a fanboy, though I am a fan.
Good. Hi.
Yes, Mr. Sayles. This is a question I long wanted to ask you over a beer, actually, because
I don't drink, so
I've wanted
you can
to
do it here.
Oh, good. Well, but maybe we could do that then. Yeah, but your great film Lone Star was set on the Mexican border in Eagle Pass, Texas, which happens to be my hometown. And when I saw it, I was stunned because it seemed to be about, of course, my life there on the border, and it captured the essence of the border better than any other work of fiction I think I've seen to date. And so I'd like your comments about your choosing that site and the original screenplay you did there. And also your film Baby Baby,
A Baby is You.
Seems to be shot in Los Flamingos Hotel in Acapulco.
Oh, Casa de los Babies. Yeah.
Right. Which is kind of my home away from home, and I lived
cool.
in Mexico, so
Yeah.
it's kind of a coincidence that you chose these two forums. And so, if you could just comment on that, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
In the case of Lone Star, there was a moment, because we thought it would be more fun to live there, that we tried to shoot this border story in Austin, Texas. And then we just kept driving around to places, and they had some nice bar interiors, but nothing looked like the border. So we went down to the border, and we actually ran into Robert Rodriguez when he was making the mariachi, and he was in Piedras Negras. And then we went along the Rio a little bit, and we got to Eagle Pass, and we felt like, oh, we can do it here. This is quite a long time ago. So in those days, you paid a dime, and you crossed the border. You just walked across the bridge, and the Mexican people could go walk across and go to the Walmart and come back. And I wouldn't say the Anglo people, because most of the people on the American side were Mexican American and actually had cousins. They had primos on the other side. They would go down, and they made really good margaritas, they also, there were things you could do, like dentists. All the American dentists were on the other side of the border because they didn't have to pay the health insurance kind of stuff, and they could charge less for pretty good dentistry work. So that was interesting. Things have changed quite a bit on the border since we shot there. The border patrol people, when we were there, their main phrase was, no hágame correr, don't make me run. They would just wave people over, and they'd come over, and they'd say, okay, get in the back. They'd drive them across the border, let them off, see you tomorrow, next day, whatever, try again. And then the drug thing started to heat up on the border, and pretty soon those same, immigration officers were having to wear body armor, which is very hot down there on the border. And some of their fellow, guys got shot, and they had to start treating everybody as if they might be drug mules and armed. And so it scaled up. There was a wonderful mayor of Eagle Pass who really made a good kind of link with the mayor, of the town across the border. And then he died in a plane crash, and the feds came in and built more fences and walls. And so they're much more separate towns than they were when we were there. And then, yes, on Casa de los Babies, I had only 4 weeks to shoot the movie. And 2 of those weeks we shot at the Flamingo Hotel in Acapulco, which is it's kind of one, little bay away from where the cliff divers jump off. And it used to belong to Johnny Weissmuller. So I got to swim in Johnny Weissmuller's swimming pool, which was really fun. And stay at the hotel while we were shooting. So I would just wait to hear the crew making noise and get up in the morning and say, okay, let's start shooting. And Thursday was Menudo Day, so we look forward to that. Yes.
This is kind of mundane, but I'm 2/3 of the way through, and it just struck me, you must have put so much work into researching this. Forget about the great characters. I mean, Native American stuff, technological stuff. Prairie dogs are a big piece of this book.
Yeah.
How much time does it take for someone to do that, a normal human being at least?
Well, what happens is once you kind of know what the story is, and this I'm sure happens to you in regular life, you're totally not interested in something, and then when you get interested in it, the stuff that's about that kind of shouts at you. And so when you start doing research, you kind of know what you need for your story, so you can read a book very quickly, and the parts that are germane to what you're doing jump out. So for my last novel, which is 1,000 pages or more long, Moment in the Sun, I probably read 100 books. Now, I didn't read every word of 100 books, but, I read 100 books, and some of them were fiction books written at the time and newspaper reports written at the time. For something this recent, one of the great resources that you have now is you can do an awful lot of virtual, going to a place. So yes, there are guys who work on drill rigs who bring their phone to work one day 10 minutes before their tour starts. And they say, well, here's where I work, and this is the guy who runs this, and they'll go up on the platform, and here's my two buddies, and I'm going to be out there in 10 minutes, and that's the tongs, and that's the mouse hole, and blah blah blah, and you really get a a seminar kind of live. I mean, one of the chapters in this is two good old boys who are blowing away prairie dogs with high-powered rifles for the fun of it. There are a good half dozen prairie dog snuff films that you can go online and see if you're into prairie dog snuff films. So that saves a lot of time, because it used to be you would have to, in my case, hitchhike sometimes when I didn't have a car to a place and look around. I had been to the little city that Yellow Earth is based on before all this started, and there were a lot of national news things that you can still find on live during the boom part of it. And so I was able to kind of go there virtually and walk around and say, oh, well, the Piggly Wiggly is still there, and da-da-da-da, but this is what's changed.
The bonus question is, the publishers you were having a hard time selling to, have they called you after they read the Wall Street Journal and New York Times?
Nah, the tough thing about being an editor, my last book took 2 years to get a publisher, and at least twice from pretty big imprints, an editor would say, well, I love this book, but I've got to talk to the people upstairs and they'll do the numbers. And I used to only hear that in the film business, but now it's in publishing. And so I say, so upstairs, and they say, oh, well, we're owned by, this company, and they're owned by Bertelsmann. And so I would say, so the person who gives it the green light or the red light will not read the book. And there's a little pause, and they say, yeah. And the numbers didn't come out. So, and they never even called us back. So
I just wonder if they called you back recently to apologize.
I think if they go somewhere and they check the numbers and the numbers hit a certain, then they feel bad about it. But just a good review is not going to make them feel guilty. Yes.
Always have to bring microphones down. You've made films and written books about so many different places and so many different types of people. Do you have, looking back and where you are now, any sort of insights onto how American culture is doing? Is there an American culture? Is it really just too many isolated people? Are things really getting worse?
What I think,
broad observation?
I think you can really say now is that there are American cultures. When I grew up, even with mass media, there were only 3 networks, and then a little bit later PBS came along, and there was a kind of limited amount of news available, and one network wasn't that different than the other one with their news. And now, how many channels are there? And for people who write miniseries or whatever, it's kind of golden time, because I had one show that I ever got on network TV for about 2 seasons, and very short. It was in the witness protection plan. They'd put it on Tuesday night one week and Thursday the next, or whatever. But in those days, you had to get something like a 25 share, which was 25% of the people watching TV on that night had to watch your show to even have a prayer of staying on the air. Now, if you get a 4 share, on some cable network, you're golden. You're going to last for a couple of years. Well, what that means is that you can not only narrowcast to people, but they can narrowcast their lives. They can choose to stay within their culture and not really veer from it. They only watch news from one source. They only go to certain events. They really don't want to know about anything else. And life being as complex as it is, and with so many choices of things to do on your Saturday night, I think a lot of people really like to have a limited, area that they go into. So I think one thing that's happening with American culture is it always had a couple strands. Now it's got so many. It's really hard to feel like, I remember a professor that taught at the college I went to said something like, well, when I read Grapes of Wrath, that totally radicalized me politically. For a book, a fiction book, to have that kind of power anymore is pretty rare. And it's partly because it's just not central anymore. There's just too many other things going on. So it'll get talked about and a little controversy will happen for a week or so, and then something else comes along. But it is a culture. It's a culture like any other culture, and all cultures change. I've written another novel since this one that we haven't even sent out to publishers yet that's set between the Battle of Culloden and the Battle of Quebec. So we're talking 1740s and 50s here. And there were even different strands of culture then, depending on who you were, even in this country. And so some of it is about European culture and native cultures bumping up against each other, and native cultures bumping against each other. Even before, European people got here, everybody wasn't on the same page, and there was a lot of contention and fighting and a lot of different cultures competing with each other. So yeah, to me, what's really interesting is figuring out how do people ever do anything together. Good luck. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Been following your work since 1984, Brother from Another Planet. So,
Thanks.
God, still think about it.
Thank you.
And now you've written so many good novels. How do you decide which platform your story fits best on, or is it just too hard anymore to make a movie as an independent?
Yeah, I mean, this particular one, Yellow Earth, I never thought that I'd be able to make it into a movie or a TV series. If you're going to make something with a military theme and expect to get the fighters and the tanks and stuff like that, you're not going to get cooperation of the military unless you make them look good, unless you make a Top Gun style recruiting poster for them. So that, there's certain stories that just, that's not going to happen. In this one, I can't imagine any oil company allowing me to, go watch them put up rigs and frack and stuff and then, not be expected to make, a publicity piece for them. The next novel that I've written, Jamie McGillivray, is based on a screenplay that I wrote maybe 20 years ago, and we've just never been able to raise the money for it. So that happens sometimes. Some of it has to do with just how many characters there are and how much scale there is. So most of my novels would not make good movies. They might make good 50-part miniseries, which now is a possibility. Nobody's picked up one so far, but also some of them just the rhythm of them seems more like it would work as a movie. The visceral quality of them seems like it would make more sense as a movie. I don't think I've gotten other people's money invested in a film in the last 10 or 12 years. So, and like everybody else in America, I'm not making as much as I used to for the same amount of work. So my ability to self-finance a movie is pretty unlikely anymore. So, my last 2-3 novels were written during Writers Guild of America strikes when I couldn't write movies for other people, and we had a couple long strikes, so I got novels out of them. Yes.
Hi, I met you at the West End Theater years ago when you had your movie Amigos.
Mm-hmm.
When it's not on CD, I keep looking for it. I mean CD, what you call that, DVD or whatever. Are you not releasing it?
I forget what platform you can get it on. There's a thing called the John Sayles blog spot.
Oh.
If you go on that,
Okay.
you can find a chart that says of all our movies where you can find them.
Okay.
So it's probably available streaming somewhere, but I'm not quite sure where it is streaming.
Okay.
And you can order a DVD from that blog spot.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We
And
have
it was
some, under a table at our office.
and it was a wonderful movie. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi, can you talk about why you selected to do the movie Matewan and kind of the what interests you about it, and the research that you did to put that movie together?
Yeah, Matewan is recently available again from Criterion Collection, and they've done a bunch of interviews and little documentaries that were made in and around the subject. When Ronald Reagan got in 1980, one of the first things that he did was bust the Air Traffic Controllers Union, pretty much just to make a political statement. Most of those people lost their jobs, never got their jobs back again. And within a year, most of the things that they were asking for, which were not so much about better pay, but better, safer conditions for them and their stress level and for the people had been met. So it wasn't about their demands. It was, let's bust this union. And they make more money than a guy in a coal mine, so they'll look like they're a bunch of pussies and we can push them around. And I just felt like, it'd be good to make something where it makes people think about why we have unions, why they came into existence. And then I had done a certain amount of research for another project that had to do with the Hatfields and McCoys. And as a sidebar, they said, and there was a relative of theirs, Sid Hatfield, who was involved in Matewan Massacre. And that just clicked with me because when I had been hitchhiking in the late 60s and early 70s through West Virginia and Kentucky, the UMW was in the middle of a really hotly contested election between Jock Yablonsky and Tony Boyle, who was the incumbent. Which ended up with Tony Boyle having Jock Yablonsky, his wife and daughter, murdered on Christmas Eve. That did not end well. And I would get these rides from coal miners, and they say, "Well, buddy, things are really bad. People outside don't know how contentious it's gotten, and we're going to have us another Matewan massacre." So I'd heard of this thing, never read about anything in a history book about it. Labor history is not something that's taught, or certainly back then was not taught in American schools. And so I just got interested in it and started digging into it. A lot more information, some very good books have come out since the movie. Matewan itself, which is down on the Kentucky border, now has a Mine Wars Museum, which if you ever get down in that neck of the woods is really beautifully done and supported by the local UMW chapter. But yeah, it just interested me and kind of sucked me in. And it's one of the movies where I really feel like the people who lived in the area, we shot it in and around Beckley, West Virginia, really became part of the movie, not just as extras, but bringing us stories, bringing us props, and a lot of people who live around there, they remember when Kennedy was shot and when they got married and when Matewan came to town.
Thank you.
Pardon? Actually, the best place to see Matewan now is from the Criterion Collection because it's a beautifully restored print with really good sound, and then all these extras. We got to interview James Earl Jones, who was in it, and some of the other actors and people who worked on the film. Yes.
So just to follow up on the question about Matewan, it was the first film I'd ever seen, and it was lovely. But you should know the value of telling stories like that. So last year, when there were teacher strikes and walkouts all over the country, the first one was in West Virginia. But not only was the first one in West Virginia, the first county where teachers voted to go out on strike was Mingo County, where Matewan was. And these were young teachers who were the grandchildren of miners who were involved in the Matewan battle. Yeah,
so it was in their souls.
Yeah, the ability for you to tell those stories lives on in very valuable ways.
There's thank you. There's actually, a couple months from now, going to be an event in Chicago where they're showing Matewan, kind of honoring those teachers who, I think that was a situation where the union probably said, "Oh, just don't tell us about this, but we're not going to get in your way here," because if the union had gone on strike, they would have faced all kinds of fines and possibly jail time, just how those laws have changed. I got time for like 2 more questions, if anybody has anything. If there's nothing? Oh, yes, okay.
Apropos of being in Politics and Prose, literary heroes for you? And do you hear any as you're writing, particularly like Westward Bound. You talked about Steinbeck earlier, but like a Wallace Stegner or
You know, I've only read one Wallace Stegner book, which I really like, the one about Joe Hill. When I read people, very often it's if I'm writing something period. So the one that's set in the 1750s, I read a bunch of Fielding and Dickens and people who were writing at the time. You read Mark Twain if you're doing something around the Civil War time and right after that. But finally, you know, I think everybody I ever read, because sometimes I've read books where I was mostly aware of the technique. When I was fairly young, I think I something popped and I became aware of technique. I was reading James Farley's The Black Stallion, which a wonderful children's book that later got made into a movie. And, it's kind of omniscient, but you're kind of hanging close to this kid and he's got this horse and it's this incredible runner. And, and it all boils down to people realize this horse is just an incredibly fast horse. Even though it's never been in an official race before, and somebody does this promotion where they're going to match it with the two other great horses of the time, the two fastest thoroughbreds of the time. And you come to this last chapter of the race, and James Farley, the author, all of a sudden, the whole last chapter, this exciting big climax, is told through the eyes of this about to retire old guy who's a race handicapper. And the chapter starts with something like, he'd always wanted to handicap a triple heat where the horses would be nose to nose to nose. And it's like, why am I hanging with this guy, But then he does it so well that you realize you're still in the race because you've read the rest of the book, but all of a sudden there's a whole nother person with a whole nother agenda, and he can do the climax without doing a cliche, because the last line is something like, I should have added another 1/16 of a pound to the stallion. And you realize he won by that much. And I was pretty young when I got aware of technique. So sometimes, I'll read somebody just for, well, how did they do that? This book and my last two books, I think, are written in present tense. But not many people who write in present tense. There are books written in first person. There's one, I'll have a chapter in my last book. Damon Runyon is a character. He was a young man and he went to the Philippines and everything. And so I got to just stop and tell, a story through his point of view. And he often wrote in the second person, which is you. You're 24 years old and you're full of piss and vinegar and, but you're facing the champ, and it was really fun. So that almost more than just, I want to write like that person. I want to see how they got around a problem or how a change in technique changed the feeling of the story. One more.
Yeah. Speaking of how did they do it, having read Gusanos and watched Men with Guns, I assume you're fluent in Spanish. How did you pick it up?
When I decided to write Los Gusanos, which is set in 1981 in Miami, but there's some flashbacks to La Habana and the rest of Cuba, back to the revolution and even to the 30s in Cuba. I realized I was going to have to read things that hadn't been translated into English and talk to people who didn't speak English or barely spoke English. So I started teaching myself Spanish. And to this day, I read and write Spanish a lot better than I speak it. But, I've directed a couple movies with an all-Mexican crew where the first thing that I learned directing down there is that the important difference between vamos a hacer un otro toma, which is let's do another take, and vamos a tomar, which is let's have a drink. The crew was cheering, and I didn't know why. But to the another movie, if you can find Pantaya, which is a streaming service, there's a movie called Sonora out right now directed by Alejandro Springle, who I've worked with on and off on a bunch of different projects that I was a screenwriter for. And it's just a Mexican movie, and I wrote it in English, and then he did the translation of the dialogue, especially into Mexican, and then the actors kind of make it a little bit more like their characters. But it was just something I had to do for the project that I wanted to do.
How did you do it?
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to sign if anybody wants some sign. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you all very much for